What's up guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I am going to be reviewing the Novation Circuit. As of right now when I'm filming this, they just released their 1.7 update a few days ago, so I thought now would be a really good time to kind of revisit it, look at, is this still worth buying? Is it just a toy, or is it a powerful tool that you should get? And spoiler alert, I do think that it's a powerful tool that you should get. So today I'm going to talk about its features, what you can expect to be able to do with the circuit, and some of its limitations, and then my thoughts on all of that. Let's start off with exactly what this thing is. The Novation Circuit is an all-in-one music making device, also known as a Groovebox, with 2 synthesizer tracks and 4 drum tracks. The synthesizer tracks both have 6-note polyphony and can be sidechained to the kick, and the drum tracks, you can only play one sound at a time on each track, but you can switch between multiple sounds on one track. Melodies, chord progressions, and beats can be sequenced in to the circuit either by using the step sequencer or by playing it in live, and then that's automatically quantized for you. One pattern is only 16 steps long, but you can chain multiple patterns together to accommodate larger musical ideas. And with a new update, you can chain them in any order you want, and you can chain up to 32 instances of patterns, so you can repeat patterns or switch between a bunch of different patterns in whatever order you want, up to 32 bars long. You can also switch between patterns on the fly, and this works a lot like it would on a launch pad. The circuit can also hold 32 session files, which you can switch between as if they're patterns. So if you want a drastic change to happen in the middle of a song, you can switch between sessions and it'll all sync up really nicely. Speaking of holding stuff, the circuit can hold up to 64 synth presets and 64 samples, and all of this is controlled by the pads. You can switch out sounds, switch between patterns, sequence in notes, and whatnot, all using the pads, which all light up differently depending on what you're doing. Beyond the pads, you get 8 macro knobs on the top here, which allow you to tweak a variety of parameters, a filter knob that is just on the master bus, and then you have a bunch of buttons that let you switch between different modes or edit patterns. That's the short version of how this thing works. Now let's talk about what I think about it. First off, the construction. I mentioned the pads before, and they feel great, both for finger drumming and for sequencing. They're very responsive. The way they light up makes everything very intuitive, and they feel just good to play, which is kind of what you'd expect from the maker of the Launchpad. The circuit is pretty small, but not too small, and it's decently light, but it doesn't feel cheap or flimsy. Novation definitely did a great job on the build here. Let's move on to the workflow. I've worked with digital audio workstations for years, so learning my way around this device was pretty easy. I'm really impressed that the people at Novation were able to pack so much functionality into such a small device, but still keep it really intuitive to use. The circuit's workflow is built around being in different modes that do different things, and then very quickly switching between them. So think of it kind of like a bunch of tabs in your web browser, only all those tabs are interconnected and laid out in a grid. So with just the push of one button or 2 buttons at the same time, I can switch between playing, sequencing, choosing sounds, working with patterns, mixing, adding effects, switching between projects, or changing things like what key or tempo your project is in. Like I said, switching between these modes is very quick, and the visual feedback you get from the lighting up of the pads makes everything that's going on pretty darn clear. It's a really hands-on approach to making music, and one that I haven't really found anywhere else. So that does it for workflow. Now let's move on to portability. One of my favorite aspects of the circuit is how portable it is. I've used it at coffee shops, in the back seat on road trips, on lunch breaks, sitting on the couch, and most of the songs that I've made on the circuit that I've actually published to my channel were made in situations like that. It allows me to very easily get a change of environment while I'm making music to kind of spark some creativity, and it also allows me to take advantage of time that would normally go to waste, like lunch breaks. As I mentioned before, the circuit is decently small and light, so you can easily fit it in a backpack or a laptop bag. Plus, it runs on AA batteries, which do tend to last quite a while. But most importantly, the circuit is a completely self-contained device. You can make a song completely from start to finish without ever having to connect it to a computer. You can compose, sequence, mix, and arrange a whole track just on the device, nothing else. The only 2 exceptions to that are when you're loading in new sounds, in which case you connect it to a computer and load in new sounds via your web browser, and when you're actually recording a performance, in which case I have the Zoom H1, which is also completely portable, and I'll just run an output out of the headphone jack into this guy and I'm good to go. And speaking of sounds, let's talk about the sound quality. The Novation Circuit comes loaded with a whole bunch of sounds and drum samples and whatnot already in the device, and they sound pretty darn good, and they're very versatile. I made an entire EP using nothing but the built-in sounds. But as I mentioned before, you can load in other sounds, whether those are from preset packs that you can buy online or they're sounds that you designed yourself. And all of this takes place right there in your web browser. No need to get any extra software. You just connect your circuit to the computer via USB, and then you can tweak away at their Synth Engine or load in whatever sounds you want. And the Synth Engine itself is wavetable based, so there's a lot of flexibility there, and it allows you to go pretty in depth to get the sound that you're going for. And then you can also assign all the macro knobs to control whatever you want, so things like amount of distortion or release time. The one bummer about that whole thing is that you do have to have your circuit connected to a computer to make this all work, but I only change out the sounds every once in a while, so that's not a huge deal for me. Personally, I use the circuit a lot more like a compositional beat-making tool and less like a sound design tool. And finally, let's talk about some limitations, because as much as I love this device, there are some limitations that you need to be aware of to determine whether the circuit is right for you. So the first major limitation is the amount of synth tracks. I kind of do wish that they had given us 3 synth tracks instead of 2, because usually you want to have a bass line, a lead, and then some sort of chords or pads. And that means that usually you'll have one or both of the synth tracks pulling double duty. And most of the time I make this work just fine, but every now and again it can be frustrating if you're trying to play too many notes at once, or if the sounds don't lend themselves to that. The other major limitation is that you can't directly export tracks as audio files. If you want to make a full song, you have to record the stereo output and arrange it on the fly, which for me actually is not a problem. It's actually an asset because it immediately makes for an interesting video when you're arranging a track live. So you get a little mini music video out of these live jams, which is great. But for some of you, this could potentially be a frustrating limitation. However, because they give you a lot of parameters to tweak, and because you have a limited number of tracks, it's pretty easy to get a mix the way you want it to sound just directly on the circuit, and then the only thing it needs is a little bit of mastering after the fact. And performing on one of these things is a lot of fun. It works a lot like it would on a Launchpad, and once again, it contributes to the hands-on approach to making electronic music that the circuit gives you. One other smaller limitation that I did mention before is that on any given drum track, you can only play one drum sample at a time. So if you wanted to do finger drumming performances like someone like Jeremy Ellis, you would have to connect your circuit to a computer and use it as a MIDI controller. Overall, despite its limitations, or perhaps because of them, I really, really love this device. It allows me to make music anywhere because of its portability, and its workflow is one that I find extremely enjoyable and intuitive. Back when the circuit first came out, there were definitely some who kind of dismissed it as a toy, but over time, as people have used it and Novation has continued to update it, the circuit has proven itself to be a very powerful, professional music-making tool. It's definitely one of my favorite ways to make music, and I can't recommend it enough. Alright, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to hear some examples of what the circuit is capable of, you can click or tap the little icon right over here, or if you would like to subscribe, you can do that over here. I do a lot more audio educational stuff, and also a whole lot of electronic music with a special emphasis on synthesizer jams and bass music. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will be back with a new video on Saturday. Peace!